Yo, so we had to do an emergency breakdown video, a little news video today because of how much that happened yesterday when it came to ROSTERMANIA. Tons of teams coming out with news about roster changes. Also, of course, LAN events. Obviously, the first massive pieces of news revolve around New York and what might be happening with Sib and Hydra joining the squad officially. So CDL Intel dropped that bomb yesterday, and there's so much to break down in that alone, let alone with Temp and with Florida and LAN events and everything else. So as for Sib and what's going on there, it sounds like New York is in talks with Atlanta Faze to buy out Sib's contract. Of course, he's the official sub for Atlanta currently. And so there'd have to be some sort of negotiation there with what that could look like. So it's not exactly clear how that might play out, but it's definitely interesting to say the least with what that could mean for the New York Subliners. So of course, if Hydra and Sib were to join the starting lineup, it looks like that would mean that Mack and Diamondcon would hit the bench, which is a massive change for what we saw in the beginning. Heading into New York with Clayster, the original roster was supposed to be Clay, Zuma, Mack, and Hydra. So those 4 players. And then of course we ended up with Diamondcon coming in, a Sim coming in after Zuma decided to retire, step away from CoD for now. And so there's been a weird period for them. Of course, they went 0-6 map count in the most recent major. And there's some legit question marks with them moving forward, the frustrations that Clay had. He put out that big long thread of tweets about his frustrations currently inside of Call of Duty and the fact that he might be taking a few days or a little bit of time to step away from playing COD. And we talked about how we interpreted that on the podcast. In my mind, it was always about Clay taking like a few days, like a little vacation to just get his mind off COD for a few days after going 0-6 in the major. But that might also have been correlated or kind of sublimely correlated with New York getting these deals done to get their roster set heading into stage 3 of the CDL. And so it gets really interesting moving forward. Again, New York was a really good team with Mack and Diamondcon on the roster. A lot of people have been correlating it to when the XM4 got GA'd and the decline of the New York Subliners. And, you know, there could be some legitimacy to that. And we've seen how good Hydra and Sib have been so far. It was funny timing because yesterday on the podcast, we brought on I Hold Shift. And I mean, I may as well play the clip for you because it was just comedy. We were talking about the up and coming stars in the CDL and guys who might be in the challenger scene that could very soon find their way into a starting lineup. So let's check it out. Person you say is
Next
going pro.
Is going pro.
You should just say, you should say your own name.
I mean, I have a name in mind who I think is going to be the next person, but I want to hear what you have to say.
I feel like I need to whisper this. I feel like we've really kind of set this up.
Yeah.
If it's not Sib, who is it?
Right? But yeah, just comedy. Shift is the best, and we had a really great combo with him in the middle of the podcast yesterday, and it was a juicy podcast. I still recommend going to check it out. So if you're wondering what's been going on with Hydra lately, again, Hydra is kind of the French phenom. He's from France. He was fantastic all of last year in Modern Warfare, playing in the European scene in France. And then when it moved online, of course, he was still playing very well with that squad, playing with Whalers and Brezzy, those other French players last year on Train Hard, and they had a lot of success last year. And then this year, he was signed to New York and was going to play with them at the beginning of the year. But then visa issues because of COVID came into play, and so he couldn't get to the United States. And then finally, in March, after they had already brought in a sim, he got United States. But again, New York was playing so well that it didn't make sense to bring in Hydra at that point, even though, you know, that was the original plan in the first place. But a sim has been so great that they didn't want to drop a sim. And so now, after bringing in Diamondcon when Zuma went out, they're just in a really weird spot with this team. And then Hydra was playing very well in the North American scene with a second place in Cup 9 with the New York Subliners Academy. That's Pro, Loot, Spart, Saints, and Hydra. And then they ended up finishing 3rd in stage 2 of the Elite Series with the same squad. And then they went on to finish 4th in the stage 2 playoffs for the Elite Series, which is okay. And then probably in their most surprising, disappointing finish of the whole year for almost any team in the amateur scene, they finished top 32 in the Open 2, which is the $40,000 tournament. So that was disappointing, but at the end of the day, Hydra's been one of the standout players in the amateur scene. So you've got to be pretty excited about him moving into New York and into this potential starting lineup here. And then the other aspect of this is Sib. So Sib's been in the up and coming name in the community for a while now as a guy who very likely could get a pro spot, of course, dating back to last year with the Atlanta Faze Academy team, who had a dominant run. And, you know, a lot of people really like Sib and how he plays. Of course, last year he was teaming with like guys like Venom, at times Paul X, and Jimbo, Gravity, Journey on the Atlanta Faze Academy team. We've seen a lot of those guys, of course, have success in the CDL and really be successful this year. And then most recently, Sib has seen a lot of success in the AM scene, playing with like guys like Draza, Decimate, and Dafpady, playing and winning the Elite 2 series, winning the Elite Stage 2 playoffs. And that roster saw a lot of success leading into that. And Sib won with Standy earlier in this year at one of the cups as well. So Sib's been very successful, and he's looked like a very, very talented player the times that I've been able to watch him play. And I've watched him in person on LAN a few times, actually. I reffed them at the Atlanta home series last year when they won the Atlanta Open, actually. But overall, I really think Sib's a really, really talented player. It's going to be insanely interesting for New York moving forward with what this could look like for their roster. For New York fans, I think you got to feel pretty good about the change moving forward. It's definitely going to be another like rebuilding period here with trying to figure out the team chemistry with Hydra and Sib now, with a Sim and Clay, and what that could look like. It's definitely tough for Diamondcon and Mack moving back down to the amateur scene, moving back down to like the New York Subliners Academy and what that could look like with their roster. As a whole, I think I'd move New York down my power rankings a little bit right now, but moving forward, there's definitely a ton of upside with this team and how Sib and how Hydra could play in the pro league or as a pro. And so it's really hard to cipher through without seeing how this team could potentially play and what this could look like. But it's very much looking like this is going to happen, and it's just inevitable before they get this deal done with Atlanta Faze. So we'll see if it actually ends up going down, but it seems very, very likely. So now the Paris Legion, baby. And we talked a lot about Paris on the most recent podcast and talked about the potential options that they had. And I did say that I thought that Fire was in trouble, and based off what we were hearing and based off what he was tweeting, and you know, that was the case. He got released officially yesterday, like released, not benched, by Paris. And in the same day, we got news that Temp was released. And at that point, it was basically inevitable that Temp was going to be joining the Paris Legion. And that's exactly what happens. This roster gets really interesting. Definitely one of the wildest combinations of rosters we've seen in a while. Now, on one hand, it's kind of a weird move, but when you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Aqua and Classic have a ton of history with Temp teaming in the past. Aqua teamed with Temp like all year long on Splice and BO4. You know, like that Champs roster was the Jerd Looney Hook combo there as well. And then also they teamed together back on Echo Fox in World War II at Champs with Facento and Saints. So, you know, they have a lot of history together. And then Classic and Temp have a ton of history together. And that was also in World War II with, that, again, that Classic roster, no pun intended, of Slasher and Hook with Temp and Classic as well. And then that was, of course, also the Denial roster back in AW. And then as well, of course, in AW, as a duo, they teamed with Tej and Crowder on Elevate. So there's a lot of history here with those few guys. And they've seen, you know, an interesting amount of success, or kind of an inconclusive amount of success throughout the years together. And so there's definitely some interesting upside with this team, with Scrap still on the roster as their fourth, and what this roster could do moving forward. I'm still not sold that this roster could be top 6 or top 7. And also it'll be a little bit interesting to see whether or not Temp or Scraps ends up running as the second AR. Kind of depends on what they want to do there. Classic is, of course, their main SMG, and then you rock with one of those two as your flex player as well. So that's something to keep your eye on moving forward. But it is kind of hard to see this team with the top 6 upside. They're going to be in that 10-6 type of ranking, but it's just really, really hard to see that the top 4, top 5 upside for this team in the long term. I'm not going to rule it out, but in the long term, it does feel pretty unlikely. So the quick update on Fire, of course, he was released, and it looks like he's going to be heading to Wester, actually, in the AM scene, to compete with Parasite, Zapdius, and Jintroid, which would definitely a good spot for him. So then, as for the Florida Mutineers, of course, there's still a lingering debate about what's going to go down with Florida and their spot. Of course, Slacked was benched, and he's now playing with Methods, Decimate, and Dafpady. So the question mark is, what are the Mutineers going to do? There were rumors that they were potentially looking at Decimate as an option. He was in a lobby with them at one point, but that's looking a little bit less likely now that we know that he's gonna be playing with Methods, Slack, and Dafpady in the AM scene. And the other person was Yeez, that CDL Intel mentioned as a potential option, but he was scrumming with Major Maniac, Rex, and Phantoms against Wester and Surge. So that's looking less likely now too. So the only other 3 guys that are coming to mind right now are Havok, Saints, and John. That seemed like the most likely options. We did see that Havok was in their lobby a few days ago, and so there are some question marks about what they're trying to do there. my best guess at this point is they're gonna stick with Havok for an event or a week or so and see how it goes, but it's still very possible that Saints or John could be the option as well. I would definitely like to see them go with John. I think the aggro SMG upside of John versus Havok is something that they could definitely use, and it would pair well with Neptune and with his playstyle and how they want to play. Havok and Slack have very similar playstyles in that sense, and I would just rather see a more aggro SMG join the ranks with Neptune as well on that squad. So we'll see. That's definitely tough to say. Saints would be pretty deserving as well. He's been playing very, very well in the AM scene, and they could still go any of those ways right now. We're gonna have to wait and see. So the last thing, of course, the last big piece of news is that LAN is officially returning. Let's go, baby. Things you love to see there. But as far as we know right now, we don't know when or where at this point, but they said there were going to be more details coming soon. It was originally teased by OpTic originally, and then Faze teased it, and they said that select events will be returning as LAN this year. So we'll see if that means, you know, the stage 3 major, if that means stage 4 major, stage 5, but at the least that means that we're for sure having champs on LAN, which is fantastic. Hopefully a full audience is allowed or able to go at that point, because I would love to be there in the stands with you guys, but we're just gonna have to wait and see what that means. We'll talk a lot more about the impact of LAN moving forward when we have a little bit better idea of when it's actually happening. I mean, realistically, knowing that we're going to have LAN, you'd have to assume that it's going to be in Dallas, but because Florida is so open as well, it could be in Florida. Like Orlando could be an option as well for champs. So again, the most realistic options, of course, will be either Dallas or Orlando for those LAN events. So my word, it's been a whirlwind, guys. Some crazy 24-hour stretch here of news, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video diving into it. If you guys did, drop a comment down below. Tomorrow, we're coming out with a tier list video, hopefully, of all the players in the CDL. It's going to be spicy, to say the least. I was going to do it today, but I had a lot of tough times going through it with certain players, and it's just wild. So anyway, as always, guys, I'm your boy, Sib, and guys, we will see you next time. I'm out.